My name is John Powell Frazee Jr., and I say that because I'm named after my father, who I'm enormously lucky and proud to be named after. But I go by Jack Frazee, and I was born in Stanton, Virginia, where my dad was the manager of the telephone company. And my mom was Margaret Jones Frazee, and she came from Charlotte, North Carolina. And I think that's probably the best place to start. My dad went to Northwestern, was born in Chicago, to Theodore Eaton Frazee and Mabel Julia Powell, but he grew up there and went to Northwestern. And my dad was a world-class sprinter while he was at Northwestern, and while he played on the football team, he was also a track man. And the story goes that there were only two people who ever beat him in the 100-yard dash. He held the Northwestern indoor record up until the 50s, and he ran in the early 30s. But the two people who beat him were Jesse Owens, who's a very famous track man in America, and a guy named Ralph Metcalf, who also was an Olympian in America. My mother was a high school all-state basketball player. So all the athletic ability that my brother got, and Chapin's, Wyatt, and all my other grandchildren that are athletic, they all got from the grandparents on that side. When he finished the schooling that he was going to go to, he didn't go all the way. I think he went a couple of years. And his father said, "John, I want you to take some time off, and I want you to go visit some of these friends that I've made around the country." And the first place he started to visit was Charlotte, North Carolina. My mother, I think at the time, was 16 years old. My dad was 22, and met my mother, and that was the end of the Around the United States tour. Fell hopelessly in love with her, and they were married, I think, after a couple of months of him being down there. Ran off to South Carolina, where you could get married underage, and then they moved back to Chicago. If I have been or could still be half the man my father is, I'd be a great guy. He was just awesome, and so was my mom. My mom didn't like the cold weather in Chicago, and I think she found my dad's parents a little quirky. And anyway, they moved back to North Carolina, and my dad became a part owner of a radio station in Asheville, North Carolina. And he became the voice of country music and a very famous sportscaster. He was a sportscaster for CBS, and one of his wonderful kind of notches in his broadcasting gun was he broadcast the Rose Bowl the one year it came east and was held in the East. So fascinating background. All that, of course, was during the Depression. My brother Barry was born in Asheville while they were there, and I think I was a surprise, born 9 years after my brother, so I kind of had three parents, in addition to my brother being my idol. He was an extraordinary athlete and a great guy, and it was fun growing up with him because he was a good swimmer, a good fisherman, a good everything. And so I had a good mentor in him and my parents. Just an amazing, wonderful, a wonderful family that I got to originate in. Frazee is a French name. They were Huguenots. They immigrated to Scotland to escape religious persecution. And then as immigrants to the United States, they came very early to the United States to again escape religious persecution. It's a lot of that going around in the last 400 or 500 years, and now it's going around again. So Grandpa Frazee, Ted Frazee, his father was Fremont Frazee. They all grew up in Illinois and were general store owners and postmasters general of the areas that they had, because in those days the general store was the post office as well. So I have a great collection of postmasters certificates for all my Frazee forefathers. But Ted's father was Fremont Frazee. Friend of his supposedly was Doc Holliday, and he worked in and was a part owner of a copper mine in Bisbee, Arizona. My grandma Frazee was, as I said, Mabel Julia Powell. Her father was a colonel in the Revolution, or great-grandfather, a colonel in the Revolutionary War, and we have some stuff about that, which is kind of cool. My grandparents on my mom's side, he was an entrepreneur and just a real go-getter. Owned a manufacturer representative kind of business. Represented a lot of firms all over the North Carolina area. And my grandmother Grace Austin, that was her name. His name was Bland Hudson Jones, and I was unfortunately not able to meet my grandfather, her dad, because he died at a very early age. So. My grandfather was a haberdasher, and he sold clothes, but part of what he did too was go all around the United States and buy goods that he took back to Chicago and sold in his haberdashery firm. And his firm was T.E. Frazee and Son, where my father never worked. He was a very unique individual, strong Episcopalian, almost anything else wouldn't do. Sent my father to boarding school from the 3rd grade on. My dad went to St. Albans Academy because he wanted to make sure he got a great Christian education and learn the right things about how to be a proper guy. But I guess the neatest story that I remember being told was he never owned a car. And I was told when asked of why he didn't buy a car, he said, well, if you need to go someplace, you can take a cab. And if you find that expensive, maybe you'll think about the places you're going to. He says, if you own a car, you'll just go all over the place to places you don't need to be in the first place. So he was kind of quirky. One of my overriding philosophies of life is, we're here to make everything we touch better than we found it. If you give advice, that's one of the greatest pieces of advice people can receive in their lifetime, because you're only here for a heartbeat anyway. I was born in Stanton, Virginia, and we moved from there after about a year, so obviously I don't remember much about that, but we moved to Lynchburg, Virginia, and to an area south of Lynchburg called Timber Lake. And I have unbelievably vivid and fond memories of living around that lake. We lived there until I was 5 years old, and the people who lived around there were just big people in my life and continued to be so all the way up through my adult life. Lots of fishing, swimming, and my dad was the manager of the telephone company in Lynchburg, having had that same job in Stanton. So we got to meet a lot of people who were interesting and important people in Lynchburg and got to know their families, and it was fun, so I liked it. My kind of godfather there was a guy named Carter Arthur, married to Buck Arthur, and there started kind of a love of my life. He owned and trained and rode Tennessee walking horses. And so as a very young boy, I got to be around horses in their stables. But he was a wonderful man and taught me how to ride, taught me how to love animals. Well, the first day of school, we moved to Richmond, Virginia, and the first day was at Glen Lee Elementary School. I remember it well. You know, you always remember your first day at school, your first day on your job. But the first day of school, I sat next to Felda Tinsley, and I fell hopelessly in love with her. And there began my lifelong pursuit at trying to be funny, which I failed at, because I thought if I could make her laugh, that would be a good indication that I was on the right track. And luckily, I was successful. And then we moved to Roanoke, Virginia, where my dad became the manager of all of the towns in southwest Virginia. So we moved to Roanoke, and I went to a school called Wasena School. From 3rd grade to 5th grade, 3rd, 4th, and 5th there. And that's really where I learned to be an athlete, which has been an important part of my life, sports has. I played sandlot, football, baseball, everything. And because my brother was such a star, you know, he had become a state kind of icon in all sports. I had an easy time getting on sandlot teams because, hey, that's Barry's brother. He's bound to know something just being around Barry. We moved back to Richmond, where my dad became the first general sales manager in the Bell system. And I went to public high school, Douglas Freeman High School. You know, I was very successful in football, basketball, track, and others, but always because of my teammates, not always because of me. I mean, I was surrounded in football by unbelievable talent and great fun. And just a wonderful place to grow up, Richmond was. I was proud to be a Virginian, as most people are, and I was fortunate to having grown up in various parts of Virginia. But the biggest break that I think I got, and most of us have gotten, is that I was born in the United States, and that's like winning the lottery. My parents taught me the biggest thing, I think, you know, if I have a top 10 things of why I've been happy in my life, they always told me that I'd be judged by the company I kept, and if I had the right friends, I'd have a pretty good chance of having a good life. I did not have a car because you never know where you'd drive if you had a car. The night before I was to graduate, I was out with several of my friends, and because my parents were always absolutely relentless in their curfews, I had to be home by 11:30, which I really didn't violate, you know. I jumped in a car with 2 guys to get me home by 11:30, and we wound up turning end over end in a Triumph TR3 going 100 miles an hour. I got in a car that I did not know they had been drinking, and was in a terrible automobile accident. And it was something that was very important in my life because I learned a lot, again, living proof about being with the right people at the right time. And I made a big mistake that night. And I wound up breaking my elbow, and I had planned to go to play a little bigger school. And while I was in the hospital, the coach came to the hospital, a guy named Joe McCutcheon and Ted Keller, both of them, and they said, "We'd like you to go to Randolph-Macon. We know you've been in this wreck, and we'll give you a scholarship whether you can play or not." And I said, see you there. So that's how I got to Randolph-Macon, which is, again, everything happens for a reason. It's one of the great breaks of my life to go to a small school like that. Small liberal arts school, 900 students, all male then. I was also lucky that it was not coeducational. But that's really one of the great stories where my life, I think, as a business person and entrepreneur started. My parents bought me a Volkswagen, a 1960 Volkswagen, of which I leased out on a weekly basis the entire time I was in college till I got a new car as a junior. I got a GTO for the money that I made from leasing out my Volkswagen. But I ran a roulette wheel, I played cards, and I leased out my car. And I was allowed $15 allowance by my parents a month. And I walked around usually with $300 or $400 in my pocket from leasing my car or running the roulette wheel or something else. It was awesome. I get this call in the summer before my freshman year, and it's Adoniram Judson Cobb Jr. Just called me Juddy. This call, hey Juddy, he says, we're going to be roommates. I was just notified I'm going to be your roommate. So when you play football, you're there in August. So my whole job in life, besides trying to get ready to play college football, is to find a roommate who is not named Adoniram Judson Cobb III. So everybody I meet on the football, I'm begging him, please, would you room with me? Finally, I meet this guy from Hedgesville, West Virginia, Bob Stearns, who wound up, I was his roommate our first semester, our freshman year. He failed out. I got another guy the next thing, but I had a roommate other than Adoniram Judson Cobb Jr. So at the end of every game, when we'd come off the field, a home game, this guy was always coming up to me, great game, man, nights away, good playing, that was wonderful, great, And then the next thing I know, it's the spring semester, and I'm playing on the golf team in addition to being on the track team. Here's Adoniram Judson Cobb Jr. This son of a bitch can play golf now. He was a scratch golfer. He and I played 1-2 on the golf team. He'd beat him to death. I'd talk him to death, and we would win. And we were Mason-Dixon Conference champions. We roomed together all the rest of the time together until I was married in school. I want to talk about that. And he became one of the greatest friends a guy could ever have. Passed away at 55, but spent almost every Christmas with our family, with him and his son for 30-some years. So, and now I'm lucky enough to still be great friends with his son and spend a lot of time with him. But Juddy was a wonderful guy. He would always remind me when I had a test that I had to study a little bit. He would make sure that I changed my bed laundry, which my mother made, because I would never. Why would you change your laundry? Perfect, good sheet, And he would tell me when my clothes got up above a line that he put, so I would take them to the cleaners. We were like the odd couple. He was an amazing guy, just a great guy. Barbara Lupini, wonderful, beautiful girl. And we had Tripp a year out of school, and then Chapin 3 years later. And right out of college, we moved to. I went to work in Baltimore, in C&P Telephone Company of Maryland, and I loved it. I mean, from the first day, on the job until, I retired. I love that sector. I fell in love with it. It was exciting to me, and I got the luck of the draw there because I got it as the industry was exploding. It was a non-management job, and I'm proud of this. Others aren't, including my dad wasn't. It was a non-management job, and about 3 weeks after I got there, the union struck, and I wouldn't cross the picket line. And Dad called me and said, "Have you lost your mind?" I said, "Dad, I'm not a union member, but I'm not management, and I think the union's right, and I'm not crossing the picket line." And they were out for 3 weeks, and I didn't work for 3 weeks and didn't have any money. I had zero money for 3 weeks. And when I came back, when the strike was settled, we got a huge raise, which I really appreciated, and nobody spoke to me for a couple weeks, which I could care less, because I thought, they were wrong. And anyway, I went about my business, sold some more telephone systems, and then got a break because went back for another training school, which nobody knew I hadn't crossed the picket line. And by the time I got back from that training school, everybody, had forgotten what the hell happened. Right before Chapin was born, I was sent to Cooperstown, New York, to learn about data and digital communications. And that's really when I kind of vaulted in my business career. I came back, I was made a sales manager when I came back from that, I was 25 years old when I was made, and there was no sales manager in that age in C&P Telephone. I did that for a year, and then was made a district commercial manager. I was manager of the telephone company on the Eastern Shore of Maryland, and there was nobody 26 years old in that job. So, and it was great. It's I learned another valuable lesson. I was sent down there to stop the Public Service Commission complaints. They'd had over 180 on the Eastern Shores because they had all this ancient physical outdoor plant. It was horrible. And I went down there, and it took me about an hour to figure out why everybody was upset. Is that all the customers have been lied to over the years, saying, "Yeah, we're going to fix this, we're going to do this." And I took a look at the budget, and there was not a plant redo scheduled for 5 years. And I went to the Rotary clubs and all the Lions and all that. It's going to be fixed in 1974 and not until. And the reason is we have all this outside open wire, all this planting. Every time it rains, you're going to have problems. But I tell you, we'll kill ourselves to fix the problems as they occur. All the complaints stopped. I mean, truth works, and again, trouble with our society now is people lie when the truth is better, and it's a shame. A guy who I had known in Baltimore who had gone to work for Central Telephone and Utilities as vice president of marketing hired me, or he came and said, "Would you like to come to work for Central Telephone Company?" I said, "Absolutely not. I love this. I'm on my way here." No. And he said, "Well, would you like to come watch a Oklahoma-Nebraska football game?" And I said, "Well, yeah." Because that was great. Those were the years that Johnny Rogers was playing for Nebraska. It was unbelievable. So I hopped in an airplane, went out there, and interviewed with the entire firm out there. Interviewed with the guy who had offered me the job, the president, and everybody else. And then I was so afraid they weren't going to offer me a job. It was unbelievable. I just fell in love with what they had planned to do. And they were going to make me the general sales manager. And I thought, God, my dad didn't get to be a general sales manager until he was, in his 50s. And here I am, 29, 30 years old. I got a chance to do this. Anyway, they offered me a job. And at the time, I think I was making $12,000 with the telephone company. They paid me $20,000. So that was more money than there was in the world, at the time. So I went to work. I went to work for Centel, or Central Telephone. Moved to Lincoln, Nebraska, and that was it. I was off and running, and it was great. I'd done my stint as president of all of Centel's stuff on the East Coast, which was wonderful because I got to spend some time with my parents as they were getting older after my dad retired, which was a fabulous good thing that the company did for me by sending me east. I could have lived anywhere, and I decided to live in Charlottesville. And I met Cassie there, and we were married kind of the year after I met her, and we got in her Dodge Dart Swinger and drove back to my apartment in Chicago. And let's see, my job I had then, I was vice president of corporate development for Centel. We didn't take a honeymoon. We got married on Saturday. I was back at work on Monday. And because we were in the middle of buying all these companies, and I was gone. Anyway, Ted was born in 1980. Tucker was born in 1981. And Bentley was born in 1982. And we were there in Chicago for up until 1992, from 80 to 92. About 1989-90, I started really thinking about finding a way to spend more time with the family and continuing to spend time with my work, because I loved it. But how could I, do both and do a better job of both? And one of the things we started looking for places to spend some winter time. And how we found Tallahassee's one of the great stories of my life. I mean, we own the telephone company here, and one of our directors, Doobie Osley, lived here. So I'd begun to spend time here, and as I would mention, we also sponsored a golf tournament down here, the Centel Classic, which had been the Tallahassee Open. Just about the nicest people in the world. I really fell in love with Tallahassee. So Tallahassee was a place in the back of our mind. Well, I was down here at a board meeting. Doobie Osley, and his wife, and Cassie and I were heading back out to his place out at Mistletoe, and he said, I have to stop by Sandy Proctor's house. And so we drove into this farm, up this road, pulled up to this cabin, parked, and I'm looking around, I see this cabin up there. Oh my God. And out comes Sandy Proctor, who I had met before. He's a very prominent artist and sculptor, really brilliant, interesting guy. And of course, like I'll do, I said, hey, Sandy. I said, if you ever want to sell this place, I'd be interested. He said, it's for sale. I said, it's for sale? He said, yeah. I said, I'll buy it. He said, well, do you want to look at any of it? I said, not really. I want to go into the cabin. He took us into the cabin, and I said, I'll buy it. And Cassie is doing her usual fade, like, here he goes again. He said, well, this is the price. And I said, that's fine with me. And so, bingo, we shake hands, and usually I begin to get buyer's remorse about 47 minutes after I've had one of these impulse moves. We go back to Mistletoe, and I don't have any. I'm just figuring out how I can get some more land. I mean, this thing was great. So, 10 o'clock, the phone rings, and it's Sandy. He says, I got bad news. I said, what? You changed your mind? He said, no, I gave this guy, Julian Miller, the right of first refusal. I said, you're kidding. He said, no. And he says, I'm betting he's going to take it. Man, this is unbelievable. Sure enough, he buys it. And I was devastated. Anyway, I got over it in a couple of weeks. Fast forward a year, Cassie and I are negotiating with Roger Ailes to buy his place in Charlottesville. Phone rings. It's Doobie. He said, your place is up for sale again. I said, you're kidding. He said, yeah, he's asking X, which was a little bit more than I had offered to pay Sandy. I said, buy it. He said, you're not going to. I said, buy it. Calls me back in 15 minutes. You got a deal. Great. We get on a plane, fly back to Chicago. I land in Chicago. This Miller guy called and says, I've changed my mind. I said, what? He says, yeah, I've changed my mind. I'm not going to sell it. I said, what is it with you people in Tallahassee? I mean, I said, fine, bam. 2 days later, he calls up again. He says, I changed my mind again. I said, let me tell you something. I wouldn't buy your house if it was the last house standing on the earth. He said, how about if I sold it to you for what you offered Sandy? And I said, then I'll buy it. I said, on one condition, that we closed this Friday. This was a Wednesday. He says, you can't do, he was a lawyer. He said, you can't do that. So we're closing this Friday. We flew down, Cassie and I and the kids. I gave them a check. We closed it. We spent the night there that Friday, and that's how we got to Tallahassee. So that's how we got to Tallahassee. How we ultimately got to Tallahassee permanently was we're going to move to Kansas City. Well, first of all, in 1992, we decided to merge with Sprint. And Cassie and I bought a home in Kansas City, which I lived in a hotel out there for about 6 or 8 months while I was working in Kansas City. And then when school started, the following year, 93, the following February semester of 93 after the merger, we all moved out there. Well, they were there 1 week until I decided I'd had enough and I was going to retire, and I did. I retired, announced it to the board, announced it at the annual meeting, went outside, and Cassie and I were out there with the kids, and I said, all right, kids, I'm going to retire. Where do you want to live? I said, you can live anywhere in the world you want to live. I won't do anything for 2 years. And they went across the street, huddled up on a corner, right across, I can still see it, beautiful sunny afternoon. I said, now don't make a hurried decision here. We're going to live wherever you want to live. We got it. They came back across the street, and they said, we want to live in Tallahassee. And that's it. We jumped in the car, 2 cars, and drove them both back to Tallahassee, and we've been here ever since. My family is everything in my life. All the other things are, a distant 4th or 5th. The love of family and the strength of family, I learned a lot about, not only from my own family, but I've learned about that from Barbara's family and Cassie's family. I have 5 children, 3 boys and 2 girls, and every one of them is as unique as can possibly be. They share some things in common, but they're all different, and they're what really my whole life's about. There are a lot of things I would do differently and do over, but I can't, and you do the best you can. But luckily, they have turned out perfectly, in spite of everything. And part of it is they've seen Barbara's family, how close they were, and the love in that family, and then they've seen Cassie and Cassie's family, and how loving and close they were. But the great thing is I have 5 children who don't ever mention half brother or step brother or sister. I mean, they are all joined at the hip. and it's a fabulous tribute to them and to Cassie. I mean, it's an unbelievable thing how they get along, how they love each other so deeply, and yet, I mean, they are merciless in how they treat each other in terms of the teasing and the other things. And I'm big on that. I'm big on the teasing part. I like it, but it is amazing. Quinque Farm, which is named after the children. You know, quinque is a Latin word for 5, and I have 5 kids. And all 5 children are in Tallahassee. Most of them are either on the farm or headed there as fast as they can get there. The 9 grandchildren are all here. My brother and his wife is here. The boys, Trip and Chapin's mom's here. And my parents, we built a home on the farm for them in '94, and they lived in their home till they passed away, and now Chapin lives in their home. I mean, it's kind of Walter Mitty-ish, you know. I mean, there's nothing that's better than that. It can't be. To talk a little bit about Cassie, I mean, Cassie Frazee is the single most extraordinary person I've ever met in my life, whether it's business or family. She always gives everybody she's with what they need. But she is extraordinary. She's warm, she's nurturing, and to watch her, having watched her with our children, really being almost the sole parent while I was working. I mean, 93.5% was her. And then to watch her do this same trick with the 9 grandchildren, it's unbelievable. And to yet be friends to, she has an enormous circle of friends that she seemed to have time for as well. You know, I was often asked, as people who are lucky like me who wind up with titles, you know, how did you do that? How did you get that job? Why were you successful in this? I was successful because of Cassie. I was successful because of her. She gave me the space, the encouragement, and the time to do the things that I dreamed about. And she has put up with unbelievable foibles and overlooked terrible, terrible flaws in my personality, and I'm being unbelievably serious about that. I love her desperately. If there's one thing that's worked in my whole lifetime, it's my family. Through some effort on my part, but no ability, you know, I've been guided by Cassie, and I've been guided by the love of my children on how to behave. And I've spent a lot of time working in my life. As I indicated earlier in our conversation, I love work. I love it. I find it fascinating. I find it challenging and unbelievably rewarding. So because of that, you know, I've spent a lot of willing time. You know, I can't say I've had to go do this and I wasn't at home a lot because I didn't have to do anything here really. I've done it because I wanted to do that kind of work. I wanted to be involved in that kind of business or so forth. So yet no matter how rewarding all the work stuff has been, no matter how much I've enjoyed it, it pales compared to watching these children grow up. And I would say now the most, people ask me, you know, what's the most thing you're proud of your children? And it's the easiest question in the world to answer. I'm most proud of watching them be a parent to their children. We have 9 grandchildren, 2 more on the way, and I have found it unbelievable how the different ways they do it, but the unbelievable ways they are raising their children. I mean, these kids are wonderful, and they are because of what my children are doing to raise their own children. And I will tell you, again, when they throw dirt on your face, if you can say that, you know, look at these Huguenots that we've raised all over. You know, we've flooded the world in Episcopalians and Presbyterians. I mean, it's just a wonderful thing.